welcome to PHRC, Raising the Standard, a TV show that has been produced and birthed out of the Paducah Human Rights Commission right here in the award-winning Paducah, Kentucky. And as usual, we have great guests, great topics that will change your life if you let it. And today we have Mr. Todd Ewing and Miss Phyllis Unterschutz, and we're going to let them tell you more about themselves, and we're going to go into the main topic for this show, and that is Race Story Rewrite Project. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Well, thank you for being with us. We know you don't live in Paducah, Kentucky.
That's correct.
So we're going to take some quality time and get to know both of you as we get into our story and the topic today and all the good things that you're doing and some good stuff you're going to be doing in Paducah, Kentucky as well. And so let me start with you, Phyllis. Your last name is German.
That's correct.
And it's a wonderful name. Unterschutz.
It's
I
very
love
well
saying
said,
it. I just
yes.
love saying it. And well, and that's a wonderful thing. If you want to, you can give us a little of your background as having German descent. That's very interesting. My brother-in-law, God rest his soul, was part German, and he was very proud of his heritage. And so we want to make sure that we bless your heritage today as well. And we'll do the same thing for Mr. Ewing. Well, Phyllis, how would you like to begin? First, telling us a little bit about your heritage and a little bit from your side of it about the Race Story Rewrite and anything else you want to share. And then, and Brother Ewing, we're going to do the same thing with you, and then we're going to get into some finer details.
Wonderful.
Sounds good.
Well, of course, Unterschutz is my married name, so that's really my husband's German heritage. But in my own family, my father's side of the family is from Germany. My mother's side from Denmark, so I am European American. I did the test where you have your saliva tested.
Yes.
And I had this theory that I was part Moroccan or Algerian, which is another story. But anyhow, I was disappointed to find out that I really have 1% Caucasus Mountain people, and the rest is Western European. So I guess you can officially call me Caucasian. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. Well, also we want to let everyone know that your husband is going to come on shortly also. Now, what is that significant thing about you and your husband as it relates to Race Story Rewrite?
I think probably the most significant thing about what brought us here to where we are now is that about 17 years ago now, we lived in a house in the Chicago suburbs, and our kids grew up and moved away, and we decided to travel. And we got a little travel trailer, and we spent the next 15 years living in an RV. We sold our house and we went out on the road. And we didn't really know what we were going to do during that time. We were just going to travel and talk with people, meet folks around the country. And the first place we went, we started talking about race. And it became clear to us very quickly that this was a conversation people were afraid to have. And so we started thinking of ways that we could introduce it and bring it up and get people to talk about it, become more comfortable. And in the process of doing that over time, we developed a workshop. We called the workshop From the Same Dust. And part of this workshop was, really looking at who we are as human beings and why we've let this race thing separate us. The more we presented this workshop, the more we became aware of our own conditioning as white people. And it started to just pop up and hit us in the face. Every time we talked about race, we would uncover another layer of our own brainwashing around race. And so that led to us writing a book. And our book is called Longing, Stories of Racial Healing. And the book is about us. And it's the stories of us discovering through relationships how we've been conditioned to feel about black folks in this country. And as a result of that book being out there, we met Todd. And as a result of meeting Todd, we have together developed the Race Story Rewrite Project. The three of us are the team members of that project. And so that's in a nutshell how what Jean and I have done together in our lives ended us up here.
And so you, your husband, and Todd Ewing are co-founders of Race Story Rewrite Project.
That's correct, yes.
Outstanding. You know, the wonderful thing about that is, first of all, is about how it initiated. That's remarkable. The second thing that is really sweet is that between you and your husband and you, Mr. Ewing, you represent racial diversity, and you represent cultural diversity as well. And so the entire, everything is encompassed and tightly fitted, I would say, that makes it very palatable for all people if they're really interested in being better at who and what they are as human beings, and as it relates to their relationships, directly or indirectly, to fellow human beings.
Right. You know,
Yes,
it's
Mr. Ewing?
interesting you're saying that because we feel the same way, except we feel like we're missing another wing, which is an African American female. And since we knew each other, we got started together. But since we started, we said, well, really, to round this out fully, we need an African American female. So we've got a couple people in mind, and so the next time you see us, it may be 4 of us.
All right. Well, it might be time for an update story
Yeah,
at that point.
exactly.
Well, Mr. Ewing, and I know you want me to call you Todd, and I'll get used to that maybe before the show's over.
Okay.
And I like to say your last name, so I might just say that quite often, okay? Because I like cultural touches. I love that because as I've shared wherever I go, wherever I'm allowed to share it, I let people know there is no pure race.
Right.
And there's no point in trying to live out your life as if you really believe that there is, because there isn't. There hasn't been for we don't know how long. So, Mr. Ewing, tell us a little bit about your background, and don't be ashamed, and don't believe that you're not being humble by sharing all the great things that have happened in your lives. We need to know those things because that helps, it gives hope, and it helps other people to realize that they have a lot to give too, and it's okay to step out and do so.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I always like to start out by letting people know that I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. One of the few black families, in fact, the only black family for 15 miles in any direction when I was first growing up. And so I always say, I really think that was the genesis of how I got started in this work, because my earliest childhood memories were really around racial experiences that I had, being the only black family in that neighborhood. And fast forward, those experiences stayed with me throughout middle school and then into high school. And really, I was a little bit off balance in terms of knowing who I was as a black person. And then I went on to college, and I became the assistant to the director of the Minority Affairs Office. And my eyes started opening as I started to understand what had happened to me as I was growing up, the dynamics of race in society, the dynamics of race on that college campus. And so my anger stage really started to set in, and I wanted to absorb as much information about people of African descent that I could, which I did. Fast forward again, I became the director of Minority Affairs at that same college. And so my job, and this was in 1980, my job was to, quote, sensitize the university to the needs of people of color. I was a one-person operation, but I had the job of sensitizing the entire campus, right? So I did that for 4 years, and quite honestly, it left me bitter and emotionally drained. My wife and I then moved to South Carolina. I said, I'm out of this racial work. I'm done with it. It's too draining. I started another business in motivation training and communication skill training. Every training we did, virtually every training we did, no matter what we were talking about, race came up. My business partner was a white female, and she looked at me and said, Todd, we got to get into this. So for 20 years, all over the South, we did racial cultural training in pretty much any environment that you can think of. And around that time, I started thinking about writing a book, and moved to Washington, D.C., and I started that book, and it was going to be called Waking Up Black in America, because I wanted to chronicle some of the experiences that I'd had being black and how I tried to address them over time from a spiritual perspective. I'd become drained emotionally. I was always reacting. I was upset. I was angry at white people. I'd see something on TV. I would get angry. And at a certain point, I said, I got to move out of this somehow if I'm going to be a force for healing. And so I started this book. And over a period of 3 or 4 years, I finished the book. And it really was a story about that whole experience that I told you about more in detail, what I call the emotional gymnastics you have to go through as a black person trying to negotiate through the United States of America on a daily basis. But how I moved from kind of reacting to these situations in an emotional way to really tapping my deeper spirituality to take myself to another place and operate on a higher plane to deal with these issues. So I ended up calling the book Seeing Heaven in the Face of Black Men. And part of that came from a conference I went to where there were only black men there. And a brother walked in a little bit late and looked around. The statement he made shot through me like electricity. He said, as he looked around, he said, "I never thought I'd see heaven in the face of a black man."
My.
And when I heard heaven in the face of a black man, that just resonated. So when I wrote this book, I said, you know, I really will know in America that we've come a long way when we expect to, want to, and see heaven in the face of black men. And part of the title of the book is to promote that image. And then Phyllis already told you then how we connected. They're writing their book, I'm writing my book. We discovered that. Flip sides of the same coin.
Yes.
So we said we need to get together.
And hence the word project.
Yes.
Which is attached to rewrite, Race Story Rewrite. Well, let me read the mission as it appears. Our mission is to create sustainable social change by elevating the discourse on race and empowering individuals to access their authentic capacities to transform cross-racial relationships. Cross-racial relationships. And that is what the human race is, cross-racial.
Yes.
Well, we're going to have your husband to come on very shortly, and then Mr. Ewing, you'll stay with me for a little while longer. But Phyllis, what is something that you'd like to say about the Race Story Rewrite from your heart? Take a moment to say.
From my heart. Thank you for posing that question in that way. I think what I would like to say about this is that I would like for my fellow Caucasians, I can't think of myself as Caucasian, it's a strange term to me, but my fellow white people, to understand that we have been fed a lie about race in this country, and that this lie has been intentionally created for the welfare of some to the detriment of others. And that this lie has encompassed our entire culture in this country. It's a lie about superiority and inferiority. And it's a lie that feeds people's brains with something that is toxic. It's toxic to the well-being of relationships amongst people in this country, but it's also toxic to our own hearts and souls. And I would like us to be able to free ourselves from that, because this brainwashing, this conditioning jerks us around and basically leads us to interact with our fellow human beings in a way that is not noble. And in essence, this conditioning robs us of the freedom to make choices based on our nobility.
Yes.
And so when I'm in a situation, I'm reacting with a black man, and let's say I've been conditioned, like most white people in this country have been conditioned to believe that black men are dangerous. Have I ever had an experience where I've actually been endangered by a black man? No, never, you know. But this story that is in my head, this race story that has come from the collective race story of America and now manifests itself in my mind as my individual race story, tells me this man is dangerous. And so now at this point, any effort that I make to interact with him, to just connect with him on a human being basis, is drenched in this fear that has no basis in any kind of reality.
Yes.
That's not freedom.
That's not freedom.
That's not freedom.
That's
right. Yes.
And we should be really angry about
Yes.
that. And we should be passionate about reclaiming our freedom, to write our own stories in our head about how we relate to one another. You know, that's the reason for the title, the Race
Yes.
Story Rewrite Project.
Yes.
Is the idea is to understand where this stuff came from, grab hold of the thing that can help us step out of it, which is virtues, and I'm hoping Todd's going to talk
Yes.
more about that.
Yes.
And to change the way then that we perceive each other, and then create these relationships that will be the basis for systemic social change
Excellent.
in our communities.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
so much. And then you just stay with us, everybody, and come back and we'll have someone else sitting with Mr. Todd Ewing. thank you for staying with us. PHRC, Raising the Standard. And if you just tuned in, we are a TV show that was birthed from Paducah Human Rights Commission, right here in the award-winning, I say sometimes sexy, Paducah, Kentucky. And our topic today is Race Story Rewrite Project. And our guests are Jean Unterschutz and Mr. Todd Ewing. Mr. Ewing was on the first segment along with Jean's beautiful wife, Phyllis. And so welcome, Jean.
Thank you.
And thank you. I know that you're all out, they're all out of town, and they're here for a special event that by the time you see this show will have already taken place. But we're going to talk about it a little bit because Race Story Rewrite Project is ongoing, and we've been fortunate enough to have it in Paducah, Kentucky, and they're going to be going all over the place with it, right?
Right.
All right. Jean, if you would, touch on a few things, even if it touches base with some things that your wife talked about earlier. Tell us a little bit about you and your relationship with this project. And then, Mr. Ewing, we're going to come back to you.
Sure.
So let me think. Yeah, so traveling and meeting people, for us in particular, coming out of a white Chicago suburb, and just meeting people that we had never even come in contact with, was transformative. And when I say transformative, I mean that we had to learn things that were unusual. We had to fit into family customs. We visited churches. We down in South Carolina. We visited the AMC church a number of times, you know, and so when I say transformative, I mean there are forces that you run into that kind of mold you into not a different person, but maybe the person that you can potentially become. Okay, so I like to say we become advanced versions of ourselves because we learn how to communicate differently, we learn how to perceive differently, we learn how to see others differently, we learn how to see ourselves differently. One of the major things for me, particularly down in South Carolina, when we entered the state, I had a bit of trepidation because I knew that the population of South Carolina was going to be predominantly black, and particularly the community that we were going to be visiting. And so I really didn't know how I was going to stand up to all that, you know, if I had the skills, the social skills, whatever. But time after time, individuals in the community we visited trusted me. I don't know why. I finally asked a person, he said, well, we have a sixth sense about people, you know. I said, well, you know, I'm from the north, you know, I'm just coming down here, you're sharing all this community dynamics with me and what's going on and who's doing what and everything. He says, yeah, well, we just have this sixth sense, you know. And so what it meant to me is that he saw some trust in me. And there were lots of people that saw some trust in me. Even as awkward as I was, because this was really in the beginning of my development as a racial healing facilitator. And so what that meant to me is that I have the capacity to become trustworthy. Not that I was 100% there. Maybe I was only 10% there. But if I kept working on it, if I kept showing up in cross-racial relationships, I could develop that capacity. And so what it's done for me, too, is it's changed my relationship with everybody, even my white friends and family members. So that's a major thing that happened to me in those years that we were traveling.
That capacity to change, to adjust, and then enhance the good in you makes you for a better man, a better human being.
Absolutely.
Also, during your travels, what were some, maybe you would want to share one or two unpleasant experiences during all of those years that you traveled, you know, on this journey that you and your wife are still on?
Well, that's really difficult. Nothing's popping up. Traveling in a trailer for 15 years with your spouse is challenging, but it doesn't really relate to racial healing so much. I don't know, any of the challenges, I think there have been some embarrassing moments when I was conducting my part of a workshop and I was saying something and somebody was like, isn't that a little bit racist, you know? And I was like, So there were a number of times where, as a white man engaged in this work, I was saying things that were offensive, and I didn't even realize it until I got the feedback, or I did something that was offensive. The feedback was important because then I could make some adjustments. But there were times when I just said, to heck with it. I even used stronger words to myself, but I said, I'm not cut out to do this work. I'm going to have to give it up. You know, I'm not efficient. But the thing about this work, and I don't know if Phyllis mentioned this, but it really it took us. It grabbed us. It's not like we decided to go out and start doing racial healing work. It's just something happened that we got involved, and it has never let us go. So in these moments, these trials where I felt like I can't do this anymore, they know I'm a racist. I'm going to come up to the next session of the workshop, and they know I did that racist thing back there. I couldn't quit. I just couldn't quit. I had to keep showing up. And so over time, it's not like I just developed a thick skin. That's what people talk about, developing a thick skin. I don't think that's really a good thing.
Not a good thing. No.
You know, yeah, it's got to be permeable.
Yes, indeed.
But I developed the ability to know who I am and to represent who I am. And if part of me is still unpolished or imperfect, okay, that's part of who I am. It's coming out. I can make adjustments. And I think Phyllis made this point that we have the ability to change our story, to re-author our story. And so we can determine to a large extent who we are and what we express as far as human capacity or human potential. We have that ability.
And for your own conditioning, whether it was intentional on anyone's part or maybe it was just life in general, but we all have had some level or form of conditioning. And so you had to work over, around, and through whatever your conditioning was and simultaneously trying to change you into
Right.
the man that you are today.
I think I understand what you're getting at, and we hear this a lot. I can't do this work until I learn such and such, or I
Yes.
become more adept, or whatever. And you're right. You have to kind of. It doesn't work that way. You can't just read 100 books and maybe go to some workshops and then decide, okay, I'm ready to go out and face the situations. It's really the situations. It all has to happen simultaneously. You learn a little
Yes.
bit of stuff, you get in a
Right.
situation, you test it out, you take some risks, you make assessments, you evaluate, you go back out, you practice your new moves or whatever.
Yes, and everything you just said is indication that there is a requirement of being honest with yourself.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult to have honest communication with anyone else when we're living a lie. And
That's
so
absolutely
that
right.
makes you the man who's honest in this journey. And something else, both you and Jean and Todd, is that this is a calling. This is not some self-imposed assignment. You've been called by a power greater than all of y'all put together. And that's why when you're discouraged, you stay on the front line.
Amen.
Mr. Ewing.
No, that's absolutely the truth. And I think what Jean said was so important because as a black person, I often get frustrated because white people give up or they won't jump in with both feet. And or they'll jump in with a little trepidation, and as soon as the water gets hot, they leave. And one of the reasons I have so much respect for Phyllis and Jean is because they have gone through all these things and they have stayed with it. And then that, as a black person who's used to either white people being prejudiced or indifferent or in denial, it gives me encouragement. Yeah, there is hope. Yes, there are people like Jean and Phyllis that you can appeal to their higher self, if you will, and they'll respond. So it's very important that people like Jean and Phyllis are out there. I want to say something about the conditioning aspect as well. White people are conditioned a certain way, but a lot of times they're not conditioned based on experience. They're conditioned based on what they've heard, what they learned in school, what they see in the media, but not because they've had X number of experiences with black folks. And so they have to get stuff out of their head that's in there through osmosis in a way.
Yes.
But black people's conditioning is often based on real experiences. We've experienced prejudice in virtually every aspect of our life. And so our conditioning makes us suspicious, makes us distrustful, makes us wonder when we come across that white person when they're going to show up prejudice, right? And so we approach people that way. And then many of us carry anger with us about what we see in society because we have white people in denial all the time or many times. And we're seeing these things, experiencing the death of our children, all these things. And so this conditioning is profound, and it's very easy for us to get bitter and then label white people a certain way. And when we interact, have a difficult time having an authentic relationship with them because we're suspicious, distrustful, and all those things.
Absolutely.
And so what we're saying is for both groups, for me as a black person, I said, if I want to deal with white people, if I want to be a source of healing, I have to, yes, acknowledge my anger, acknowledge that, but say, what else can I tap in myself to not deny the feeling, but transcend it and operate on a higher plane so I can be a source of healing.
Yes.
So yes, I'm going to see that stuff that's happening in these communities, but I'm going to tap compassion, or I'm going to tap trustworthiness, or I'm going to tap courage and say, how can I use that to interact with white people authentically, even though I know that they could have prejudice,
Yes.
so that we can begin to create healing so
Yes.
these things that happen in these communities can stop. If I continue to treat white people with suspicion every time I interact with them, I
Yes.
send a certain energy, and then they react to that energy. And we get into what I call this emotional combat, or this emotional tug of war.
Yes.
So our premise is to rewrite our story.
Yes.
We tap our spiritual consciousness, tap specific qualities, and literally apply these qualities situationally as we're interacting across race and culture.
Yes.
And that, to be honest, is a challenge, and it's a discipline, but it's the hope.
Yes.
It's a hope for, I think, all of us.
Yes. Earlier this year, there was the film Racial Taboo. And Mr. Ewing, you were interviewed several times in different segments there. It was an excellent film, and everything that you've just talked about encompasses that film. And what is the main thing that you wanted people to come out of Racial Taboo? And then either one of you can tell us what is the main thing that you want people to come out with from the Race Story Rewrite Project?
You know, I think Racial Taboo was so good at capturing fears and hopes, and the nuances of why blacks and whites can't have a conversation. And I think it captured that very well and very authentically, very honestly, but left us with the sense that if we can deal with this conditioning that we have, if we can all give each other a little bit of a break, and then form these friendships,
Yes.
which was the message of the movie. If we're going to begin to move past this history and this conditioning, we really have to reach out and form these friendships to build trust so that we can deal with the tough problems that we need to deal with.
Jean, what would be the main thing that you would want people to come out if they happen to participate in the Race Story Rewrite Project in any way?
Well, the purpose of a workshop is to do some work. And if you've done
Yes.
some work, you want to see some results. So the results, and so we've designed our workshops so that there are as close as possible real life experiences in the context of this day-long workshop.
Yes.
So what we want folks to leave with is some new skills,
Yes.
and particularly this ability to be in a situation and to feel this urge to respond based on the conditioning, and to replace that urge, or to work around that urge, or through whatever method, disempower that urge,
Yes.
and make a choice and enact a different a reaction or behavior. So for instance, at one point in my life, I decided to overcome backbiting.
Yes.
So, you know, at the office, it's like, did you hear about so-and-so, you know, and you want to get into there and you want to be part of the group. You know, you realize on the one hand that being part of the team is participating in this backbiting thing.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you realize how devastating it is to the person that's not there.
Yes.
So in those moments, I would feel this urge to be part of the group, but I had to like really kind of like bite my tongue, you know,
Yes.
white knuckle it at first, you know, and really pick the higher self value or capacity of compassion for that person that wasn't there, because it's just absolutely unfair and unjust to demean somebody who's not there to defend themselves.
Yes. As we're going to have to, it's been so good, but we're going to have to go. But Race Story Rewrite Project, it's about accepting responsibility, and it's about understanding the issues and concepts and conditionings of not only ourselves but others as well, so that we can open our hearts, open our minds, and open our doors, so to speak, so that we become better at who and what we are. We allow others to become better at who and what they are, and then collectively we become a better human race. Thank you for being with us for Race Story Rewrite Project and our guests, Todd Ewing, Phyllis and Jean Unterschutz, and I appreciate you.